Bava Batra, Daf Yomi Bava Aleph and Bet. Wisdom, intuition, and prophecy. Chacham, Adif, Manavi. The physical world in which we live, the world of the Maaseh mitzvot, the world in which we can actually do mitzvot, is the world that offers us the opportunity to convert the information that we've learned into something experiential. And it's through the mitzvot that we can actually experience and change and development and growth. The growth and development of our neshama doesn't come from additional information. It comes from expanded experience, and it's through the mitzvot that we can expand our experience. That doesn't mean to say that Talmud Torah is not experiential. The experiential nature of learning is dependent on how we learn. The brisa that we say every morning, Eilu Dvorim, lists a whole lot of experiential experiences, Hachnos Sorchim and Kibud Aveim and Gmirus Chasodim, and then it says, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. And more than anything is Talmud Torah. So Talmud Torah is also experiential if you learn it experientially. So we have the option, it's one of the bechirus that we have, it's a choice that we have every moment of our lives, whether we're going to convert our experiential activities into digital and informational experiences, or we're going to convert our more informational experiences into experiential, into something which is truly experiential. And we can make our learning experiential. Our learning is meant to be experiential. And it's through experiential learning that we really are able to discover insights and to find something that is new, and not just going through an informational activity. And right at the very beginning, if we discussed this many times, of why we started the Matmonim program, was the concern that I have that Daf Yomi was becoming an informational experience, an informational activity, and a social activity maybe, but not a deep intellectually experiential activity. And the way one does that with Torah, we know that advice is given us, for example, before you start learning, how you prepare yourself for learning. There are people who, before they sit down and open their Gemara, they put on their Shabbos clothes. You're learning Torah. If you're going to move into experience, you can't just be watching TV one moment and then opening the Gemara the next moment and then back. We're not digital beings. We can't turn on and off like that. So one has to prepare. If we're going to make learning an experiential experience, then one has to prepare for it. People wash their hands before they start learning. They sit down. You do tshuva before you start learning. It's opening the Torah. You're asking Hashem to help you understand His Torah. Are you worthy of that? So before you do anything, we do tshuva before we start learning. We daven to Hashem. There's a tefillah at the beginning of many Gemaras. You have the actual tefillah before you start learning Torah. You pray to Hashem, so that you will open my eyes, you'll give me insight and understanding, you'll connect me to the source of Torah as I learn Torah, that this won't just be informational, that this will in fact be experiential. Different people use different techniques. I try and make a point of always doing something more left-brainish, more right-brainish before learning, so it doesn't just become an intellectual activity, whether it's through meditation or journaling, whether it's through learning some Musar or Divrei Kabbalah, something that takes me into a different space, so that when I open the Gemara, I'm already in an experiential space, so that the learning can become experiential. We see in our Gemara, the Gemara is discussing different measurements. What does a person mean if he tells you, I'm selling you a piece of my vineyard? How much is a piece? So Sumchus says not less than 3 kavin and so on. Omer Rabbi Yossi, ein elu ela divrei nevius. Where do you get this from? Sumchus, where do you know exactly this measure? A person just says, I'll give you a piece of my vineyard. Where do you get it from that it means 3 kavin worth? This is just divrei neviut. This is just you're talking as if you're a prophet. Says Rashi, ein elu ela divrei neviut, belo tam. You don't explain the logic at all. You're just saying it. Amar Rabbi Avdimi demin Chaifa, miyom shecharav beit hamikdash nitla nevuah min haneviyim v'nitna lechachamim. From the day that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, nevuah was taken away from the Nevi'im. We don't have any Nevi'im after the Churban Bayis Sheni. And nitna lechachamim, and it was given to Chachamim, implying that the Chachamim have nevuah. That's really interesting, because nevuah is experiential. Chachamim, one would think, is an intellectual thing. Talmud Chacham is intellectual. But that's not what the Gemara says. Nitla nevuah min haneviyim v'nitna lechachamim. That means the Chachamim now have the capacity to experience nevuah in their learning. Ask the Gemara, tu chacham lav navi? Why are you separating a wise person and a navi, suggesting that neviim and chachomim are two different things, and that Yeshayahu wasn't a chacham and Yirmiyahu wasn't a chacham? What do you mean? Says the Gemara, no, Hachikama. Even though Nevuah was taken away from the Nevi'im, from the prophets, prophecy was removed from prophets, min hachachamim lo nitla. Prophecy was not removed from chachamim, which means chachamim always had the capacity for prophecy, and even after the Beis Hamikdash, that never changed. Amar Ameimer v'chacham adif min navi. And in fact, a chacham is better than a navi. Shneimar v'navi levav chokhmah. It says a navi has a heart of wisdom. If you're comparing a Navi to a Chacham, who's the greater one? If you say a Navi is like a Chacham, that implies that the Chacham is greater. Amar Abaya Tedal, says Abaya, I'll bring you a proof. This is very, very interesting proofs the Gemara brings. A person comes up with an amazing Chidush. And later on you discover somebody else has said the same thing, another great Talmud Chacham has said the same thing. How is that possible? All these years it hasn't been said. And we find it a lot. I remember when learning Yerideh, how often it was that you would find something that the Taz would say, I've got this amazing chidush, I've understood something, I've never understood something, and he would say something, and you'd learn the Shach, and the Shach says exactly the same thing, although at that point they hadn't seen each other's work. It's amazing chidush, and at the same generation it's being said by somebody else. How does that happen? Clearly, both are coming from a source up there. It's not just his own innovation. If it was his own innovation, it would be unique to him. But so often a person innovates a new idea and discovers others are saying the same at the same time. So it must come from Shemayim. Maybe they have similar minds. They think in a similar way. It can be the two people think of the same thing. Rabbi Shmuel Lapin was an uncle of mine, a son of Rabbi Lapin, and he was talking to me about a particular Talmud Chacham, and he said he has a problem with that Talmud Chacham who's written a lot of Sforim. He says because he steals the stuff, he takes the stuff from other places, and he doesn't quote, he doesn't say where it comes, it's not his own. So I said to Rabbi Shmuel, how do you know that? He says, because he steals my stuff. If you look at the Sforim, I'll show you, he's taken it from my Sforim. So I said to him, this Gemara, Reb Chaim Shmuel, maybe he also thought of the same idea. How do you know he took it from your Sefer? He said, because I made mistakes in my Sefer. And he copied the mistakes as well. But it can happen that a person has, two people have the same great idea. It says the Gemara, sometimes you'll say something and you'll discover Rabbi Akiva said the same thing. Clearly, Rabbi Akiva, you're not a Rabbi Akiva, you don't have the same mind as Rabbi Akiva. And nowadays you have it, a Talmud in Yeshiva will ask a kasha, and it's Tosfos' kasha. A Talmud in Yeshiva will give an answer, and it's an answer of Reb Chaim Brisker. How can that be? So you see that we can be inspired with things that are beyond our capacity to reason logically. They belong to much bigger intellects than ours. But somehow we sometimes get access to it. Maybe in this particular thing, he's got a bit of Rabbi Akiva in him. Sometimes a person will say something and he'll discover it was said to Moshe on Sinai. Ask the Gemara, maybe he was just like groping around and it's coincidental, he happened to stumble on the truth. For a lot of time, says the Gemara, no, when a person learns, doesn't he give reasoning? This is not coincidental. It's not that he just stumbled on the truth. He's giving reasoning. Where does the reasoning come from? This is way beyond his pay grade. Where does that come from? Clearly, this is a level of nevuah. So when a chacham is learning Torah, and he's gone through the various levels of the Mesilas Yesharim, from Zehirus to Zerizus to Nekiyus to Purishus, he's worked through all the levels, and he's come to the level of Ruach HaKodesh in his learning, he will have the opportunity to access things that are way beyond his normal level of understanding. Rashi says, Ein elu divrei nevius. This that Rabbi Yossi says, that what you've said, what Sumchu says, it's just prophecy. Below tam, it's without logic. And Tosfos assumes that what Rashi is saying that is negatively. But that Rabbi Yossi is saying, Sumchus, how can you say something without any kind of logical basis to it? But the Torah's Chaim asks, the Torah's Chaim was a very, very interesting person. He was the Talmud of the Ramah and the Rebbe of the Bach. So he's right in that period of time where the Shulchan Aruch is getting developed. The Ramah is part of the Shulchan Aruch, the Bach writes on the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur, and in between the Torah's Chaim is a Talmud of the Ramah, a Rebbe of the Bach, and he proves that it can't be that it's lignai, that Rabbi Yossi is saying this in a derogatory way. And you look at the Torah's Chaim, you might think that he's learning like Tosfos, because Tosfos also says, our Tosfos here says, Lo lishvach ka'amar, ela klomar shomer belo tam. Tosfos seems to understand that Rashi also is saying it negatively. And the Torah Chaim says it can't be negatively. And I suggest that what the Torah Chaim means is he's not disagreeing with Rashi. On the contrary, he's saying when Rashi says belo tam, that is not a negative comment. When Rashi says that Rabbi Yossi is saying is Tzumchus, what Tzumchus has just said is something belo tam. It's divrei nevius. It doesn't mean that it's negative, that he had no right to say it. It means this has come from some other place. This is not something he's worked out, that Tzumchus has access to Ruach HaKodesh in this way. And we see this in Rabbeinu Hananel, where we've got a similar comment in Eruvin. Ein elu ela divrei neviut, he says, she'enan nishma'im ketam ela bigzera. You have to accept it not because you understand it, but because somebody of the caliber of Tzumchus said it. That's why you've got to accept it as a gzera. Sometimes the Talmud Chacham says something, and it comes from a higher place. You don't always have to understand the reasoning. And Tosfos goes that way as well. This idea that sometimes the Talmud Chacham can say something without reasoning, and we accept it because of who the person is. You know who the person is, and you know where this is coming from. If a Talmid Chacham says this, when people used to go and ask Shailas to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and sometimes to the Shteipler before him, very often there were no reasons given. If you asked Reb Moshe Feinstein a Shaila, you got pages and pages of reasoning. If you ask the Shteipler a Shaila, you ask Reb Chaim Kanievsky a Shaila, you got a yes or no answer. And people went away very satisfied with the yes or no answer, because they knew it was coming from some other place. They knew it was coming from a high place. This wasn't just coming from themselves, because the Talmid Chacham, Adif Minovi, he's able to access a level of Ruach HaKodesh, and people know that. But there is a limitation with that. On Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, we've got an interesting discussion in the Gemara, which we won't go into now, about neighbors, back to the Bava Batra topics. 3 neighbors whose yards all open onto an alleyway. The alley has one opening to Rishus Harabim, to the public thoroughfare, and the other one is a cul-de-sac, the other one is closed. So clearly the alley is designed for access. So the question is, the one closest to Rishus Harabim, does he have the right to use the alley more deeply in? In other words, if it's just for access, then he's right next to Rishus Harabim, so he walks out of his house and into Rishus Harabim. Is he allowed to wander down the rest of the alley, maybe put some storage stuff in the rest of the alley? That's what the Gemara there is discussing. And the Rosh, in Tshuvas Klal, Kuf Siman Beis, the Rosh brings a Shaila where the Rambam is quoted, and he says the Rambam doesn't seem to be going like the Gemara. The Beis Yosef also has difficulty with the Rambam. The Maggid Mishnah says the Rambam gets it from our Gemara, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. But the Rosh says, I don't see it in the Gemara. And he says at the end there, Ani dikdakti ze min ha-Gemara min ha-Tosefta. I've come to my conclusion using the Gemara and the Tosefta. This is a very important little piece of Rosh. Ve'ein anu marz'irim lekabel halacha leMoshe miSinai shekatav ha-Mechaber. And if we've learned something out of reasoning it through the Gemara, we're not obligated to abandon our understanding of the Gemara and adopt the Rambam's view. It says Moshe la'alocha leMoshe miSinai, meaning Moshe the Rambam. We don't have to accept what Moshe got from Sinai if we learn the Gemara differently. That's the power of Gemara. If a Rishon learns the Gemara and comes to a conclusion, the Rambam says differently, but the Rambam doesn't give reasons. Ve'ilu katav ra'ayot v'haya mareh lanu panim kidvarav. If only the Rambam would have given proofs and explained to us how he reached his conclusions. This is the big objection that they had to the Rambam at the time. That the Baalei Tosfos, the Western European school, the European school of learning was always with reasons, with logic. But the Rif and the Rambam, it was just statements. It came. They knew what they were saying, and for the hundreds of years thereafter, we've been busy trying to understand where they got it from. Says the Rosh, if the Rambam would just tell me how he got to it, then I would work him. If his proofs were good, we would have had to accept it because of who the Rambam is. I wouldn't have argued with the Rambam if the Rambam gave reasons. But the Rambam didn't give reasons. I don't have to accept the Rambam axiomatically when logically I've come to a different conclusion. So yes, there is Ruach HaKodesh in the words of the Chachomim, but you can't work with that. If you come to a different conclusion, then Chacham Adif Minovi. At the end of the day, you've got to follow what the Chachma says. The Ritvo learns that it's lishvach, but important in the Ritvo is v'nitna lechachamim nevuah was given to the Chamim Perush sheyesh yasigu besichlam dvarim harbe she'en koach b'sechel hativi lahasigam. What does that mean? That means a chacham who's learning, and as I explained to you, you're learning experientially, not just learning informationally. And he's gone through the whole process, and he's a person of enormous character and a big tzaddik. When he learns, he will learn things that are beyond the power of his intellect to be able to grasp. And he'll get them. That's the idea of nevuah, that he immerses himself in it, and he gets it. The Vilna Gaon we know the Vilna Gaon, when he had a difficult dilemma and not know what to do, and there was no way to work it out. There wasn't logical solution to the dilemma. He would learn for 7 hours non-stop, and then close his Gemara and access in his heart. What does my heart say I should do? So the intuition he felt after 7 hours of learning, he was happy, was a source of Ruach HaKodesh. That's where that intuition came from. And the Ramban says something difficult. Nevuat HaChachamim hi derech HaChochma lo nitla, ela yod'im ha'emet b'ruach HaKodesh shebekirbam. The Chachamim know the truth from an inner place of intuitive knowledge that comes from Ruach HaKodesh. It comes from a higher place. That's where it comes. Yes, they reason everything out and they work everything out, but that knowledge of truth comes from a higher place. And we've quoted before, we go back in Nozir Daf, over a year ago, Nozir Daf Lamed, we spoke about the Chassam Sofer, where the Chassam Sofer says at the end of Orach Chaim, and he brings the Ravid, he says, many times there was Ruach HaKodesh in our Beis HaMedrash. Says the Chassam Sofer, he doesn't mean Nevuah, that there was prophecy from heaven, that there was a bat kol. What he means is, Hainu Ruach Hashem aloskei Torah lishma, asher zochim lechaven ha'amet, afilu in lefi ha'teva, chochmatam v'sichlam lo yasigu yudei. It means that the Chachamim in the Beis HaMedrash of the Ravid would grasp things beyond their capacity to understand intellectually, and that came through a level of intuition that links to a divine source. That's what intuition is. We're not talking about an instinctual response. We've talked before, there's a difference between instinct, which every animal has, and intuition, which only a human being has. And if you're sure that this is a source of intuition, that it's coming from a higher place, it's very, very powerful, especially if you're a Talmud Chacham. Especially if your head is in learning, especially if you've developed your character, especially if you're learning experientially, just not informationally, that there will be this intuitive level that goes far beyond intellect and accesses a source of inspiration that goes beyond one's power of intellect. And then the Chassam Sofer goes on with a very important point, and he says, this applies not only to Jews. The Ribono Shel Olam bestows this level of intuitive information and knowledge and insight even into non-Jews. People often say, where did Shakespeare get the brilliance? Where did he get an ordinary person living in London in those days? Where did he get this kind? It's phenomenal. Where did Mozart get, as a 5-year-old child, the capacity to write a symphony which is complex and brilliant, even much later on, even for much older and developed? Where does it come from? Says the Chassam Sofer, העניין כנ"ל סל כמאת דעת החמינא דווקא בישראל המושגח מאל עליון נאמר כנ"ל. You might think it's only a Jewish person who has this connection to Hashem through the Torah he learns, through the Musar he develops, and through everything else that he does. אבל אומות העולם שאומר דבר חוכמה שאינו ראוי לפי מזגו וטבעו לא יצואר בחוכמה אלא כסומה בערובה. You might think it's just coincidental. Shakespeare stumbled upon it, Mozart stumbled upon it. No, says the Chassam Sofer, Mashmalan, this comes to teach you that's not so, that even though they can be bestowed with an intuitive knowledge, a divine inspiration that is way beyond their level of education and their level of intellectual grasp, that's something Hashem does for the door sometimes. He wants to bring certain things into the generation, and he uses different kalim for that. They can even be people who are not students of Torah, people who are not even Jewish. Even there can be a level of Ruach HaKodesh. And we need to understand that Ruach HaKodesh is a spectrum. Ruach HaKodesh is not just some point that you turn on suddenly. It's a spectrum. And it goes from Beethoven and Mozart and Shakespeare all the way, lahavdil, to Moshe Rabbeinu, which is absolute nevuah with full clarity. That's one long spectrum. Maybe Moshe is in a different category, but the other Nevi'im are all on that spectrum. And we all have that capacity. Any time that you are able to Take yourself aside, to separate yourself from what's going on around you in the world. Immerse yourself deeply in the learning that there's nothing else going on. And to do it experientially, to do it with neshama, to do it with soul and with feeling and with emotion. If you're able to learn that way, you open the gateways to a level of intuition and to a level of inspiration that is way beyond anything that we would expect in terms of our knowledge and education, and thereby to be able to access truth at a level we didn't think was possible.